بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. Briefly inshallah, a few minutes only, not a dars, just a reminder. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from reminding one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We heard Surah Shams, and if we ponder over this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swearing by things of His creation, which is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to swear by His creation, but for us we only swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if a person has to take an oath. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would see that in many places of the Quran. But when we see in the surah what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sweared for, what is Jawab al-Qasam? The Qasam is for what? When you say Wallahi, by Allah, and so on, such and such is true. How many verses in Surah Al-Shams, or how many Qasam has been said, and then after that what is the Jawab and what is the Qasam is for, what is the swearing is for. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, this is one. And I'm not going into the translation of the verses, but by the sun that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, and this is by itself is an ayah, a sign, and a miracle that we see every day, and we're not paying attention to this creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how great that is. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, and the moon, and by the moon, it's another sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, the day and the night. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا, and the skies and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built it and created it. وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا, and this earth that we live in. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, and this nafs, this soul, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this amazing soul that we don't even know how it looks like. Although it's in ourselves, we do not know how our soul looks like. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided it to what is its matters of obedience and the opposite of that. All of these are qasam. For what? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, he is successful, the one that do something to his soul, and that is zakkaha, purifies it. That shows how important it is for the Muslim to work on himself, to purify himself with all of these verses. Like when you say by Allah, by the most merciful, and so on, the more you repeat it, the more the matter is very important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, as we see, swearing to the fact that He is successful, the one that purifies his soul. This is the definition of success. Al-falah, the everlasting success and happiness, is when a person purify his soul. How can a person purify his soul? And how can a person perfect his iman? Because these are the people, those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, and they are the people of Jannah. Since mentioned before, to make all the talks consistent, and that we have to refer everything that we say to the first pillar of Islam. So to be truthful in this, the only way that we can purify our soul is by the Tawhid and al-ittiba'. By La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. This is how simple the matter is. By La ilaha illallah means there's no one worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means a person purify his soul, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, avoiding associating partners with Allah, having the hearts to be attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Otherwise it's contaminated, it's filth, it's opposite to what purifying is. For a person to purify his soul, he has to worship none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, because sins contaminate the hearts and contaminate the soul. Why? Because it's disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Innovation in the religion and so on, all the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade us from, all of these things are ways to put the nafs down and not to purify it. Ways that a person will have deficiencies in his iman. So this is by the Tawheed and by al-ittiba', and that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final messenger. That means the only way that we can purify our soul is by following the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. There is no need for us to sit and think of new inventions of how to purify our souls. that we get the best thinkers to think of what to say, what to do to purify our souls. There is no need of that. The simple way is the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the one alayhi salatu wasalam that has the most perfect pure soul that ever existed on the face of earth, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to follow the example of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So why is it difficult? Why people seek other than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in seeking purification of the soul? To answer this is, people seek pleasure for their own selves, and we have to be careful. We seek the purification of our souls not to seek in pleasure, to feel good and things like that. We seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and feeling good will come definitely, but a person has to submit himself, have to humble himself to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So then when it feels good, this is the right feeling. Not that a person tries something and it feels good and he says, this is it, now my soul is purified. How would a person know that his soul is purified or not? We don't have any means to know that except by following the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, what did he order us to believe in? How was the ibadah of the Prophet ﷺ? How was his salah? We need to have the patience on establishing this, the obligations away from sins, and to do the extra acts of worship that definitely purifies the soul. And this is, we need to have our lives programmed to purify our souls with the way of the Prophet ﷺ, praying the prayers in the masjid, in the houses of Allah, to the best of a person's capability if he's close to the masjid, as the way of the Prophet ﷺ, guarding our salah to perfect it, sitting in the masajid if a person have the time to do that. For example, after Fajr, a person would sit and make dhikr, as the Prophet ﷺ used to make. Dhikr is a way of purifying the soul, but again dhikr. How do we make dhikr? By La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. You can name anything in the deen, you refer it back. This is if you don't have anyone to ask in matters of the religion and you're confused, refer back to La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is the principle of this deen. How do I make dhikr? For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. This is La ilaha illallah. How do we make dhikr? According to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The things that we say and the way we say it also, according to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. A person won't be confused that one time he's following the Prophet ﷺ, another time he's doing something else. So making the adhkar in the morning and in the evening, making sure that we never miss such adhkar. And the sunnah prayer, the 12 rak'ah sunnah. And fasting Mondays and Thursdays, or even more than that if a person is capable of doing that. The night prayer, even if it's something little that a person starts with, whether it's 2 rak'ah or something that he would pray before Fajr in the middle of the night, something that he would do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But see, every ibadah that the Prophet ﷺ used to make, we should not deprive ourselves from not having a share in it. At least that a person would have a share in this ibadah. So if a person is not able to pray the 11 rak'ah with a long night prayer, at least some salah at night, 2 rak'ah. What is 2 rak'ah would take too much of the person's time. And again, the obligations comes first, and the charity, and the fasting, and so on. And especially, and forgive me for taking too long, sometimes a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for him to do an act of worship. Take advantage of that after securing the obligations and being away from sins. Meaning of which, someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for him to fast, optional fasting. Then make a lot of fast. Another person, it's made easy for him to make salah. Then make a lot of optional salah. Someone made it easy for him to give charity. Allah gave him wealth. Then use this, concentrate on this act of worship after concentrating, after securing the obligations and being away from sins and having a share of all the different ibadat. But special ibadah, a person, he found that Allah made it easy for him. Imam Malik rahimahullah, one of the people at his time, his name is Abdullah al-Imari. He was a abid, someone that have so much worship, acts of worship and so on. He sent to Imam Malik rahimahullah, calling him to have more uzla, to seclude himself more, and to do more acts of worship, advising him to do more acts of worship and to stay away from people a little bit. Imam Malik was busy doing what? Spreading ilm, spreading knowledge, teaching the people the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and teaching them this ilm. So this man sent this to Imam Malik, telling him, you need to stay away for some time and make a lot of ibadah and so on. Imam Malik rahimahullah, and it shows the mannerism of the ulama. Imam Malik responded to him and he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَسَّمَ الْأَرْزَاقِ كَمَا قَسَّمَ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى الْأَعْمَالِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala distributed rizq among people. In the same way He distributed deeds among the people. And sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَإِذَا فَتَحَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ عَلَى عَبْدٍ فِي بَابِ الصَّلَاةِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might make it easy, open a gate of tawfiq and guidance for a person to make a lot of salah. MashaAllah, that it's for others, it's made for him to concentrate on the fasting, someone to concentrate on the charity. And he said, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فَتَحَ لِي بَابَ نَشْرِ الْعِلْمِ وَهُوَ مِنْ أَفْضَلِ الْأَعْمَالِ وَلَا شَكٍّ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for me to spread the ilm, to spread the knowledge, the way of the Prophet ﷺ. This is the best of the deeds, definitely, which is the job of the messengers, spreading the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama are the best after the prophets. So he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for me to do this, and I'm satisfied with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made it easy for me, and I don't see myself better than you, and I don't see what you're doing is less than what I do, but this is what Allah, so this is the rizq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why a person, if he sees in himself the ability, for example, to seek knowledge, then he should seek knowledge. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be a scholar in the religion of Islam. If a person doesn't see himself like this, well, what is the ibadah that he can do more and more of? In which all the ibadat he would have a share in, but he would try his best to do something, whether it's fasting, salah, dhikr, and so on, although we do the minimum. Sometimes we don't even have the minimum in all of the different ibadats in the context of the optional acts of worship. But this is how we elevate ourselves, and this is how we purify ourselves, by having the minimum requirement after the obligations in these optional acts of worship. So again, it's like the simple dhikr in the morning and in the evening, what to say in all our situations, to fast 1 day a month, 3 days a month, Mondays and Thursdays, and the night prayer, something little, and so on. And then when a person do all of these acts of worship, reciting Quran every day, even if it's 2 minutes, what 2 minutes would take, think of the 5 minutes rule, one of the good things. 5 minutes, you can do so much in 5 minutes, right? And once a person do all of these things, and he have to open the Quran, and with the busy schedule, 2 minutes opening the Quran, reading a line or something like that, mashallah, it's a great reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After he would do this persistently, we would find out for ourselves that we would do more ibadah than the other and things of that nature without having to get a lecture in this. The person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open ways for him. This is rizq, this is provisions from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as to fear our sins, so that it might deprive the person from such a rizq and guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the concern of to be purified and to have our souls purified, as we heard in the verse of the Quran, which is the job of the Messenger of Allah to purify our souls, by La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and imitating the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka Muhammadin wa sahbihi wa sallam.